How Will You Measure Your Life? By Clayton M. Christensen, James Allworth, and Karen Dillon. Picture a room buzzing with Harvard Business School's finest graduates. These aren't just smart people. They're the cream of the crop, polished to perfection, ready to conquer the world. Within months, they're pulling down serious money at powerhouse firms, marrying people who look like they walked off magazine covers. Everything seems golden. Now jump ahead 10 years. The shine has worn off. Many of them are miserable at work, going through divorces, barely recognizing their own kids. One of them, Jeffrey Skilling, remember him, Enron's golden boy, is sitting in a federal prison cell. So what happened? How do brilliant, well-intentioned people end up living lives they would have run from if they'd seen them coming? This isn't some made-up cautionary tale. It's what Harvard professor Clayton Christensen watched unfold among his own friends and classmates. Year after year, he'd ask his graduating students one deceptively simple question on the last day of class: how will you measure your life? The book we're diving into today is his answer to that question. It sold over 1 million copies and been translated into dozens of languages, not because it promises easy wins or quick fixes, but because it does something far more valuable. Christensen, who built his reputation predicting which companies would soar and which would crash, turned those same powerful tools inward to tackle the questions that actually matter. By the time we're done today, you'll have a mental toolkit for building a genuinely happy, purposeful life. You'll understand not just what to think about your future, but how to think about it. We're going to unlock the secrets to finding joy in your work, creating relationships that go the distance, and living with rock-solid integrity. This isn't just a book summary. It's a blueprint for designing a life you'll actually be proud of. So let's jump in. Christensen noticed something disturbing about his brilliant classmates. While they were crushing it professionally, their personal lives were falling apart. These weren't bad people. Nobody plans to get divorced or become strangers to their own children. They certainly don't plan on ending up behind bars. Yet their choices led them exactly there. This observation led him to build his final lecture around 3 critical questions. How can I be sure I'll find success and happiness in my career? How can I be sure my relationships with my spouse, children, and friends become lasting sources of joy? And how can I be sure I'll live with integrity and stay out of jail? Instead of serving up simple advice, he offered something more powerful: theories that help you understand cause and effect. He believed good theory works like a compass, helping you navigate situations where you can't afford to learn through trial and error. You don't get practice runs at marriage or raising kids. So let's tackle that first question, the one that consumes so much of our energy: finding happiness in our careers. We're constantly told to chase the money, the title, the corner office. Christensen watched many classmates do exactly that. They'd say, I'll just do this banking gig for a couple years to pay off loans, then I'll pursue what I really love. But those couple years often stretched into a lifetime. Their lifestyle inflated to match their fat paychecks, trapping them in a cycle of chasing the next bonus in jobs they'd grown to hate. They'd confused what actually creates happiness. They were chasing what researcher Frederick Hertzberg called hygiene factors. Here's how this works. Hygiene factors are things like salary, job security, status, and working conditions. When these are terrible, think toxic boss or unsafe workplace. You'll absolutely hate your job. But here's the twist. Fixing them doesn't make you love your job. It just stops you from hating it. That raise doesn't bring deep fulfillment. It just quiets the dissatisfaction temporarily. The opposite of job dissatisfaction isn't satisfaction. It's just the absence of dissatisfaction. So what actually creates genuine satisfaction? Hertzberg called these motivators. Motivators include challenging work, recognition for your contributions, responsibility, and personal growth. These are what make you jump out of bed excited for the day ahead. They're the feeling that you're making a real difference and learning constantly. Christensen saw this firsthand as a young manager. He tells the story of Diana, a scientist at his company. At a company picnic, watching her play with her husband and 2 young kids, he realized she wasn't just an analytical chemist. She was a mother and wife. He started imagining two versions of her workday. On bad days, she'd drive home feeling undervalued, frustrated, and demeaned. That feeling would inevitably poison her interactions with her family. But on good days, when she cracked a tough problem, helped colleagues succeed, and got recognized for her work, she'd head home with renewed self-esteem. She'd walk through that door as a better wife and mother, energized for whatever came next. This hit Christensen hard. He realized that if you want to help people, management is actually one of the noblest professions. Great managers don't just oversee work. They create conditions for people to experience motivators every single day. The trap is prioritizing hygiene factors over motivators. Money isn't evil, but it becomes a problem when it's all you're chasing. Real joy comes from finding work you believe is great work. As Steve Jobs put it, the only way to do great work is to love what you do. But that raises another question. How do you find that work? It's rare for someone to know exactly what they want from day one. This is where one of the book's most powerful ideas comes in. The difference between deliberate strategy and emergent strategy. A deliberate strategy is your plan, what you set out to do. Christensen's deliberate strategy was becoming editor of the Wall Street Journal. But life rarely follows the script. Unexpected opportunities and problems pop up along the way. Your responses to these surprises form your emergent strategy. The perfect example is Honda's entry into the American motorcycle market in the 60s. Honda's deliberate strategy was competing head-to-head with Harley-Davidson. They built big, powerful bikes and shipped them stateside. It bombed spectacularly. Americans saw them as cheap knockoffs, and worse, the bikes started leaking oil because they weren't built for long American highways. The company was hemorrhaging cash and circling the drain. Meanwhile, Honda employees in Los Angeles had been zipping around on little 50cc motorbikes called Super Cubs to run errands. These were the delivery bikes from Tokyo's crowded streets. One Saturday, frustrated with the failing big bike strategy, one employee took his Super Cub into the hills for some dirt riding. It was a blast. Next weekend, his colleagues joined in. Soon, other riders in the hills started asking where they could buy these fun little bikes. At first, the Honda team resisted. This wasn't the plan. Their strategy was selling big bikes. But gradually they realized these small Super Cubs were the only thing keeping them alive. An opportunity had emerged from their failed plan's ashes. Eventually, Honda's management embraced this new direction. The emergent strategy became their new deliberate strategy. They ended up creating an entirely new market for off-road recreational biking and became wildly successful, not by executing their original plan, but by staying open to a better one they never could have predicted. There's a powerful career lesson here. If you haven't found work that provides both hygiene factors and motivators, you need to stay in emergent mode. Experiment. Try stuff. Stay open to the unexpected. Your strategy will almost always emerge from a mix of your deliberate plans and unexpected opportunities. Only when you find what really works, what you love and excel at, should you flip to deliberate mode and focus your energy. But what about those fork-in-the-road moments, deciding between your plan and a new opportunity? How do you choose? Christensen offers a simple but powerful tool. Instead of trying to predict the future with perfect financial projections, ask a different question. What assumptions need to prove true for this to work? Think about Disney building their theme park outside Paris. It lost money for years. Why? They had thriving parks in California, Florida, and Tokyo. The Paris planners assumed that since Europeans lived closer together, more people would visit. They projected 11 million visitors yearly, assuming each would stay 3 days like at other parks. Based on that, they built hotels and infrastructure for 33 million guest days. They got their 11 million visitors, but those visitors only stayed 1 day. What went wrong? The other parks had 45 rides, enough to keep families busy for 3 days. Paris opened with just 15. You could do everything in a day. An unconscious assumption that the park would be the same size was baked into the numbers, and nobody questioned it. Before taking a job or making a big career move, list the assumptions that need to prove true for you to succeed and be happy. Are you assuming you'll have a supportive boss? That the company culture matches what they claim? That this job will let you learn and grow? Then find quick, cheap ways to test those assumptions. Talk to former employees. Ask for a short-term project before committing. Don't just leap. Look first. Now, let's say you've found work you love. You have a clear strategy. That's great. But a strategy is just wishful thinking until you dedicate resources to it. This brings us to the final career puzzle piece, resource allocation. Your real strategy isn't what you say it is, it's what you do. It's where you invest your time, energy, and talent. Andy Grove, Intel's legendary CEO, once said, quote, "To understand a company's strategy, look at what they actually do." The same applies to our lives. We all have limited resources. We're essentially running several businesses in our personal lives. Our career, our relationship with our spouse, raising children, community involvement, our health. All these businesses compete for our resources. The big danger, especially for high achievers, is unconsciously allocating resources to activities that give the most immediate, tangible signs of accomplishment. Where do we find that? In our careers. We ship a product, close a sale, get promoted, get a raise. The feedback is fast and clear. Investing in relationships, though, is a long game. You can neglect your spouse for a day, and nothing seems different. You don't get daily report cards on raising kids. It's not until 20 years later that you can look back and say, "We raised good kids." Because the feedback loop is so long, it's dangerously easy to underinvest in family and overinvest in career. We tell ourselves family is most important, but our calendars and bank statements tell a different story. This is how so many of Christensen's classmates ended up in hollow, unhappy lives. They prioritized things giving immediate returns while starving the most important parts of their lives. So examine your life. Where are your resources really flowing? Because if they're not aligned with who you want to become, you'll never become that person. This perfectly transitions to the second big question, finding enduring happiness in relationships. The principles are the same, but the stakes are infinitely higher. When thinking about relationships, especially with our spouse, we often focus on what we want, what we need. But Christensen suggests a radically different perspective borrowed from product innovation. It's called the job to be done. The core idea is we don't just buy products, we hire them to do a job in our lives. He tells a fantastic story about a fast food chain wanting to sell more milkshakes. They did typical market research, bringing in customers and asking, "How can we improve this? Want it more chocolatey, cheaper, chunkier?" They made the improvements. Sales didn't budge. So Christensen's team took a different approach. They stood in a restaurant for hours just watching. They noticed something odd. Nearly half of all milkshakes sold before 8:30 in the morning. Buyers were almost always alone, bought nothing else, and drove away. The next morning they went outside and asked these people a strange question. "What job were you trying to get done when you hired that milkshake?" Turns out they all had the same job, a long, boring commute. They needed something to make the drive interesting. They also knew they'd be hungry in a couple hours. They'd tried hiring other things for this job. A banana? Gone in a minute. A donut? Crumbly and messy. A bagel? You have to drive with your knees while spreading cream cheese. But a thick milkshake? Takes 20 minutes to suck through that thin straw, substantial enough to keep you full until lunch, fits perfectly in the cup holder. It did the job better than any competitor. The lesson? The company had been trying to improve the milkshake based on product attributes, but customers were hiring it for the experience. Now apply this to relationships. What job is your spouse hiring you to do? And more importantly, are you actually doing it? The danger is thinking we know. We give partners what we'd want, or what we think they should want. We offer solutions instead of empathy. Christensen shares a story about his friend Scott. He came home from work to find the house messy and his wife Barbara looking exhausted. His immediate thought was, She's had a tough day, she needs help. So without a word, he rolled up his sleeves and started cleaning the kitchen and making dinner for the kids. He felt pretty good about himself. But when he found his wife upstairs, she was upset with him. He was shocked. "How can you say I ignored you? I did all this for you." Barbara explained her day wasn't difficult because of chores. It was difficult because she'd been with small, demanding children all day and hadn't spoken to another adult. The job she needed done wasn't clean the kitchen. It was have a meaningful conversation with an adult who cares about me. By jumping into action, Scott completely missed the real job. He was trying to be selfless, but he was making a more chocolatey milkshake when what she really needed was a banana. Thinking about what job your spouse needs you to do requires a profound shift in perspective. It requires empathy, and it leads to a deeper truth. The path to happiness in relationships isn't just finding someone who makes you happy. It's finding someone you want to make happy, someone whose happiness is worth sacrificing for. Because, as Christensen observes, it's sacrifice that deepens commitment. The more you give of yourself to something or someone, the more committed you become. This brings us to another powerful idea for families, the theory of capabilities. What determines what a company can and can't achieve? Christensen breaks it down into three things: resources, processes, and priorities. Resources are tangible things. People, cash, technology, brands. Processes are how a company transforms resources into something more valuable, how they work together, communicate, and make decisions. Priorities define what matters to the company. Now think about Dell Computers and a small Taiwanese supplier named ASUS. In the 90s, Dell was a giant. Their strategy was hyper-efficiency. ASUS came with a proposal: we can make your circuit boards for 20% less. For Dell, this was a no-brainer. Lower costs, fewer assets on the balance sheet. Wall Street loved it. Then ASUS came back: we've done great with circuit boards. Let us make the whole motherboard. Again, Dell agreed. This continued step by step as Dell outsourced assembly, supply chain management, and eventually even computer design. Dell kept the one thing they thought most valuable: their brand. Then in 2005, ASUS announced it was launching its own computer brand. In this Greek tragedy, ASUS had used Dell's business to learn everything needed to become a powerful competitor. Dell had outsourced its capabilities, one seemingly smart decision at a time, until it had outsourced its own future. The lesson: never outsource the future. You must figure out what capabilities you'll need down the road and keep them in-house. Here's the frightening parallel. Christensen worries many parents are doing to their children what Dell did to its business. We live in an age of outsourcing. A generation ago, children worked alongside parents, in gardens, fixing houses, mending clothes. There was always work to be done. Today, we outsource that work. We hire people to mow lawns and clean houses. And in the vacuum, we fill our children's lives with resources: soccer practice, piano lessons, tutoring, summer camps. Each of these can be wonderful on its own. But collectively, we risk giving children abundant resources while denying them chances to develop their own processes. Things like teamwork, problem-solving, taking responsibility, and resilience. Self-esteem doesn't come from being told you're great. It comes from achieving something important when it was hard to do. By sheltering children from challenges, we inadvertently deny them opportunities to build capabilities they'll need to succeed in life. Christensen shares a memory from childhood. He ripped his favorite Levi's on the playground. He took them to his mother, who was incredibly busy with 6 children. Instead of fixing them, she showed him how to use her sewing machine, gave him a few ideas on how she might approach the repair, and then moved on. He sat there, clueless at first, but eventually figured it out. The patch wasn't pretty, but every time he looked at it, he didn't see a clumsy repair. He felt a surge of pride. I did that. Some of the greatest gifts his parents gave him came not from what they did for him, but from what they didn't do. They gave him opportunities to solve his own problems, to build his own processes. This leads to the most important capability, a child's values or priorities. A friend of Christensen's once shared a profound insight about parenting. Children will learn when they're ready to learn, not when we're ready to teach them. Those learning moments often come unexpectedly, and if we've outsourced our children's time to coaches, tutors, and others, we won't be there when they happen. We lose precious opportunities to shape their values. This brings up a philosophical question known as the ship of Theseus. Ancient Athenians kept the mythical hero Theseus's ship in their harbor. Over years, as wooden planks rotted, they replaced them one by one, until eventually not a single original piece remained. The question, is it still the ship of Theseus? Christensen poses a similar question. If your children gain their values and priorities from other people, whose children are they? This isn't about helicopter parenting. It's about being present. It's about consciously building a family culture, a set of shared priorities and problem-solving approaches that become so ingrained, so automatic, that your children carry it with them long after leaving home. This brings us to the final, perhaps most critical question: how to live a life of integrity. Christensen argues the path to moral compromise isn't a steep cliff, but a gentle slope, paved with an endless stream of extenuating circumstances. The tool we use to justify that first step down the slope is marginal thinking. Back to business for a moment. Think of Blockbuster in the late 90s. They were the undisputed king of movie rentals. Then tiny upstart Netflix came along with a crazy idea: mailing DVDs to people. Blockbuster's executives looked at this new market. On a marginal basis, it looked terrible. Profit margins were much lower than existing stores, and if it succeeded, it would cannibalize their profitable business. From the perspective of their current success, the marginal cost of entering this new market seemed too high for the marginal gain, so they dismissed it as a, quote, niche market. Netflix, on the other hand, had no existing business to protect. For them, the full cost of building this business was their only option, and they saw huge opportunity. We all know how that story ended. Blockbuster went bankrupt. The trap of marginal thinking is framing the alternative as continue doing what we're already doing. But the real alternative for Blockbuster wasn't maintaining status quo. It was bankruptcy. We almost always end up paying the full cost of our decisions, not the marginal cost. Now here's the vital link to integrity. The marginal cost of doing something wrong just this once always seems alluringly low. A voice in our head says, I know as a general rule I shouldn't do this, but in this particular situation, it's okay. The path to disaster for people like Jeffrey Skilling or trader Nick Leeson, who brought down a 233-year-old bank, didn't start with big, dramatic decisions to be corrupt. It started with one small, seemingly insignificant choice to bend the rules, to cover up a small mistake. But once you've crossed that line once, the next step is easier, and the next. You don't realize the road you're on until you look up and find yourself somewhere you never thought you'd be. This is why Christensen offers a simple, powerful rule. It's easier to hold to your principles 100% of the time than 98% of the time. He learned this himself as a young man playing on his university's varsity basketball team in England. They made it to the championship game. But the game was scheduled for Sunday. At 16, Christensen had made a personal commitment to God never to play ball on the Sabbath. He went to his coach, who was incredulous. His teammates, his best friends, begged him to play. Can't you break the rule just this one time? They asked. It was a terribly difficult decision. He prayed about it and felt a clear sense he had to keep his commitment, so he told his coach he wouldn't play. Looking back, he realizes resisting the temptation of just this once was one of the most important decisions of his life. Because life is an endless stream of extenuating circumstances. Had he crossed the line that one time, he would have done it over and over in the years that followed. The boundary is your power. Once you cross it, it's gone. So decide what you stand for, and then stand for it, all the time. Ultimately, all these theories about motivation, strategy, resource allocation, and capabilities are tools. But tools are only useful if you know what you're trying to build. And that's the final, most important piece of the puzzle. You must have a purpose for your life. This purpose isn't something the world delivers to you. It must be deliberately conceived, chosen, and pursued. Christensen suggests it has 3 parts. First, a likeness, a clear picture of the person you want to become. Second, deep commitment to becoming that person. And third, a metric, a way to measure your life. For Christensen, his metric came after a period of personal crisis. He realized that while we tend to measure lives in summary statistics, dollars earned, promotions won, people managed, the only metric that truly matters is the individual people he was able to help, one by one, to become better people. The time you spend clarifying your purpose will be the most important investment you ever make. It'll be the rudder keeping you from being tossed about in rough seas. It'll be the compass guiding every decision. And it'll be the ultimate answer to that one final question: how will you measure your life? As we wrap up our journey through How Will You Measure Your Life, it's worth pausing to reflect on just how radical this book is. In a world obsessed with hacks, shortcuts, and 7-step formulas for success, Clayton Christensen gives us something far more enduring: a way of thinking. He hands us powerful lenses, borrowed from boardrooms of the world's biggest companies, and shows us how to turn them on our own lives. The most powerful lesson for me is the profound connection between our professional and personal worlds. We're often taught to compartmentalize, be one person at work and another at home. But Christensen shows us the same invisible forces that drive companies toward greatness or ruin are at play in our careers, marriages, and in quiet moments when we choose between right and wrong. The logic of resource allocation, emergent strategy, marginal thinking, these aren't just business concepts. They're the fundamental mechanics of human choice. What makes this book timeless is its deep empathy. It recognizes that good people, with the best intentions, can make a series of small, seemingly logical decisions, leading them to unhappy, regretful lives. The genius of Christensen's work is helping us see long-term consequences of short-term choices. It's a warning, but more than that, it's a guide. It shows us how to avoid common traps that befall even the brightest among us. So what can you do right now to start applying these ideas? First, take an honest inventory of your resources. For the past week, where did your time and energy actually go? Not where you intended, but where they really went. Your calendar and daily routine don't lie. Does that allocation reflect the person you truly want to become? If not, what one small change can you make this week to start closing that gap? Second, think about one important relationship in your life, with a parent, sibling, or close friend. Instead of thinking about what you want from them, ask yourself, what job do they need me to do? Is it to be a better listener, a source of encouragement, to simply be present? Try to do that job without expecting anything in return and see what happens. Finally, define your line. We'll all face moments of compromise. The time to decide what you stand for isn't in the heat of the moment, but now, in quiet reflection. What principles will you not compromise, no matter the extenuating circumstance? Write them down. Commit to them 100% of the time. This isn't about being rigid, it's about being whole. That was a summary of How Will You Measure Your Life by Clayton Christensen. We've certainly hit the highlights today, but I'll be honest with you, a summary can only take you so far. The real magic happens when you hold the book in your hands and let the ideas sink in. It's in those quiet moments when a particular story or simple phrase resonates in ways you didn't expect. This podcast is designed to help you decide if this book is a worthy investment of your most precious resource, your time. If anything we've talked about today has struck a chord, I encourage you to grab a copy. Reading it isn't just about learning. It's an experience that can genuinely change how you see yourself and the path ahead. A link to the book is in the description. Also, if you found this summary valuable, I'd be grateful if you'd hit that like button and subscribe to the channel. That way, you won't miss our next journey into another life-changing book from the billionaire's bookshelf. Let's keep growing together.